They were already laughing when Nathan Bourke leaned over and pointed. "What's that supposed to be?" He was 23, broad-shouldered, wearing a hoodie that cost more than most people in that room earned in a day. He was pointing at the man in the corner booth, specifically at the Legion cap sitting on the table beside his coffee. Olive green, worn near colourless along the brim, with a small tarnished pin on the front that most people wouldn't have looked at twice. Elwood Girard looked up from his newspaper just briefly, then went back to it. "Hey, I'm talking to you, old-timer." Nathan held up his phone and started filming. His three friends shifted in their seats the way young men do when someone else is doing the thing they're too cautious to do themselves. "Where'd you get the hat? The Remembrance Day sale at the dollar store?" His friends laughed. One of them added something that made Nathan grin wider. If you had been watching Elwood that morning, and Teresa Ouellet, who had worked the Tuesday breakfast shift for 4 years, had been watching him since he walked in, you would have seen nothing change in his face. Not anger, not embarrassment, not the flinch most people would have shown, just that same quiet stillness he always carried, the kind that some people mistake for emptiness but is actually something much denser. He was 73 years old, Elwood Girard. Born in Truro, Nova Scotia, raised on the kind of practical self-sufficiency that the Maritimes used to produce like a natural resource. Compact and solid at 5'7", with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and clean-shaven cheeks that showed every year of his age without apology. He looked like a man who might fix your furnace or haul your firewood. He wore a faded olive green work jacket with a corduroy collar, a dark flannel shirt underneath. The only decoration was a small regimental pin on his lapel, the crest of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, dull with age, and that Legion cap sitting beside his mug like a quiet companion. He had lived in Truro for 11 years, in a small house on the far side of the rail tracks. He walked to the diner every morning, ordered dark roast, tipped well, and was gone before the breakfast rush arrived. He shoveled his neighbours' driveways in winter without being asked. He fixed the fence at the community garden after the big storm 2 summers ago, and left before anyone could thank him. He had never in 11 years volunteered a single word about his past. People assumed he was a retired tradesman or maybe an old farmer. Nobody asked. "Seriously though," Nathan was saying, still filming, "what's the pin for? Did you win that in the garden club?" More laughter from the booth, louder now. The diner had gone quiet in that particular way, the way it goes when something uncomfortable is happening, and everyone is hoping someone else will be the one to stop it. Teresa was standing near the coffee station, holding a pot she'd forgotten she was holding. The other customers studied their plates with sudden intensity. A young mother at the window table had pulled her daughter closer without seeming to notice she'd done it. Nathan leaned forward over the seat back. "I mean it as a compliment, honestly. Very vintage, very, what do they call it, authentic." His friends snickered. Elwood set down his newspaper. He looked at Nathan Bourke steadily. The way you look at a stretch of road you've driven 100 times and know exactly where the ice forms. "I earned it," he said. 2 words, quiet, not defensive, not wounded, just plain. Nathan's face broke into a grin. He turned to his friends, performing for the camera now. "He earned it, boys. He earned it." He looked back at Elwood. "What'd you earn it for, Grandpa? Perfect attendance?" Elwood picked up his mug and drank his coffee. The mocking went on for another few minutes. Nathan was getting bolder, his friends more vocal, the energy in that booth rising toward the particular pitch that comes just before stupid tips into ugly. Teresa had started moving toward the table. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she was moving anyway when the bell above the door rang. What happened next is worth paying attention to, because this is the part that doesn't get posted on social media. This is the part that matters. A man in his mid-40s came in from the cold, jeans and a winter jacket, unzipped over a plain grey shirt. He was lean, with the kind of posture that doesn't leave a person even when they're dressed like everyone else. He scanned the room the way someone does when they've spent years in places where knowing a room could mean the difference between going home and not. His eyes moved across the corner booth, took in the young men, the phone still extended, and then landed on the old man sitting alone with his dark roast. He stopped. Not the way someone stops when they're deciding where to sit. He stopped the way a person stops when they see something that hits them in the chest before they've had time to prepare. His gaze had fixed on the Legion cap on the table, on the PPCLI pin on the lapel, and his face had gone the colour of old concrete. He crossed the diner in 6 steps. Nathan and his friends watched him come, their laughter dying in stages like a radio being turned down by someone who knows the song. The man stopped at Elwood's table. He stood there for a moment. His hands were at his sides. Then he straightened, not to full attention, because he was in civilian clothes, but something close enough that every person in that room understood what they were seeing, and he said, "Mr. Girard." His voice carried something in it that none of those young men had ever heard directed at an old man in a diner before. Elwood looked up. He didn't show surprise, just the same steady look. "Harwick," he said. "Major Liam Harwick, currently serving, 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, temporarily posted at CFB Aldershot," pulled out the chair across from Elwood Girard and sat down without asking. He set his keys on the table and looked at Elwood for a long moment before he said anything else. Then he turned to Nathan Bourke and his friends. The phone was still up, still recording. Major Harwick looked at it without expression, then back at Nathan. "Do you know who this man is?" Nathan blinked. "What?" "I'm asking you a question." Major Harwick's voice was level, completely, dangerously level. "Do you have any idea who you have been filming for the last 10 minutes? He's just Nathan started. "He is Warrant Officer Elwood Girard, retired. Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 26 years of service." He said it the way you say something that should already be common knowledge. "He served in Cyprus in 1978, Bosnia in 1993, Rwanda in 1994. The names landed with different weights in the room. Cyprus, far enough away to seem like history. Bosnia, that one had some gravity, even to young men who hadn't studied it. Rwanda, that one sat differently. Even Nathan went still. In September of 1993, Major Harwick said, "Warrant Officer Girard was part of the Canadian Forces contingent deployed to the Medak Pocket in Croatia. You don't know what that is?" He paused. "I'm going to tell you." There was no anger in how he said it, no performance, just the particular weight of a man who knows exactly how to fill a room with the right kind of silence. Croatian forces had conducted a military sweep through that region. When a ceasefire was negotiated, Canadian soldiers were ordered in to hold the line. What they found when they crossed into that area was evidence of a massacre. Krajina Serb civilians murdered, villages burned to the foundation, bodies in the fields. He stopped. He let that land. And the Canadians were ordered to stand there, hold their positions, document everything they witnessed, and not fire unless fired upon. He looked at each of the young men in turn. They were fired upon. For over 24 hours, Warrant Officer Girard held his position under direct fire. His unit helped stop a second wave of murders. They collected and preserved the evidence that would eventually be presented at war crimes proceedings at The Hague. Major Harwick's voice had not risen once. And then the men and women who served there came home to Canada and were told, officially, formally told, not to discuss what they had seen. The government did not want it made public, so they didn't discuss it. For 9 years, until investigative journalists broke the story in 2002, Warrant Officer Girard and every soldier who stood in that field carried what they had seen in complete silence. Because that was what was asked of them, and because that is what they did. He looked at Nathan's phone. "Turn that off," he said, "and delete what you recorded. Not because I'm ordering you to, because you should make that choice yourself, right now, and understand why you're making it." Nathan lowered the phone. A beat passed. His thumb moved across the screen. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room all the way to the corners. Then someone stood up. She was in her early 60s. Margaret Holst, a retired school librarian who ate breakfast at that diner every Tuesday morning since her husband passed 3 years ago. She had grey hair pulled back neatly, a good wool coat, and the expression of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and has quietly decided, right now in this moment, to set it down. "My brother served in Bosnia," she said. Her voice was steady. "Not at the Medak Pocket, he was in Sector West. But he came home in 1994 and he wasn't the same man who left." She paused. "He couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't say a single word about any of it, and couldn't explain to us why he couldn't. For almost 2 years he barely left his house. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to reach him. The diner was absolutely still. He told me once, just once, years later, that on his last night before the unit flew home, he was in very bad shape. He said a warrant officer from another company had found him outside in the dark, sitting alone, and had sat at him without asking permission and stayed there until morning. Just talked, didn't try to fix anything, didn't lecture him or tell him he'd be fine. Just stayed and talked until the sky came up. She looked at Elwood. He called him the sergeant who saved my life without ever throwing a punch. He never told me the man's name. She stopped, collected herself. My brother died in 2019. PTSD complications. He never got to say thank you to that man, and I never knew what he looked like. I never knew his name was Elwood. She sat back down, and then she did something she clearly hadn't planned. She started to cry, quietly, with the particular relief of a person who has been waiting a very long time to be able to. Teresa was not pretending to be composed. She had stopped trying. Elwood Girard had not moved through any of this. His face was still that same measured stillness. But something had shifted behind his eyes. Not grief exactly, something older than grief. The look of a man who has carried a name in him for 30 years and just heard it spoken in the open air. He looked at Margaret Holst. What was his name? He asked. She told him. Elwood nodded once, slowly. He looked down at his coffee cup. He was quiet for a moment in the way that some silences are crowded with things that will never be said out loud, and that is exactly as it should be. Major Harwick turned back to Nathan and his friends. They looked very young now, younger than they had when they walked in. You want to understand what that pin means? He gestured at the PPCLI crest on Elwood's lapel. It isn't a costume, it isn't nostalgia, it isn't a man pretending to be something he used to be. It is the physical proof that a person showed up for 26 years in places where showing up meant absorbing things that do not leave the body. Things that come home with you and live in your house and change the sound of your own silence. His voice had not risen once during any of this. It didn't need to. He came home and kept showing up quietly, without asking a single person to notice, without expecting one word of acknowledgement, and you decided in about 10 seconds that you knew his whole story. He looked at Nathan. You saw a worn cap and an old pin on a man you'd never met, and you made up a story about what it meant. That is a very easy habit to fall into. It is also a very costly one. He sat back in his chair. Most people are carrying something you cannot see from where you're standing. Most of those things are heavier than anything you've carried yet. Nathan Bourke stared at the table. When he looked up, his face was a different shape than it had been. I didn't know, he said. I'm sorry, I was being an idiot. I'm genuinely sorry. Elwood looked at him for a moment. There was no performance of forgiveness in it, no satisfaction, no lesson being driven home, just the same steady regard. The trouble with recording everything, he said quietly, is that you start to believe the recording is the moment. It isn't. The moment is what happens when the camera isn't running and nobody's watching. That's where character is. That's the only place it's ever actually built. He let that settle. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because it's genuinely useful information. Nathan nodded. It looked like it cost him something. Yes, sir, he said. Elwood laid money on the table. He stood, put on his jacket, tucked the Legion cap under his arm. In the room full of people, he looked exactly the way he always looked. Compact, unhurried, like a man who might fix your furnace or haul your firewood. At the door, he paused, turned back. Theresa, he said. She looked up from where she was standing. Good coffee this morning. Then he was through the door and into the November grey, the particular flat cold that Nova Scotia does in November. Not dramatic, not beautiful, just present and insisting, the kind of morning that doesn't ask anything from you except that you keep moving. Major Harwick stayed long enough to finish the coffee Teresa had poured for him without being asked. Before he left, he placed a Canadian Forces challenge coin on the corner of Elwood's table. On the reverse side was the PPCLI regimental motto, Pro Patria, worn smooth from years in a jacket pocket. He set it there and left without explaining why, because it didn't need explaining. Margaret Holst sat at her table for another half hour. When she finally left, she sat in her car in the parking lot and called her sister-in-law, the woman who had been her brother's wife, who she had not properly spoken with since the funeral. They talked for a very long time. At one point, without planning to, they laughed. It was the first time they had laughed together while talking about him. It wasn't the wrong thing. It was finally the right thing. Nathan Bourke drove home in near silence. He looked up the Medak Pocket when he got back. He looked up the Rwanda deployment. He did not sleep well that night, and for once, it was not because he'd been staring at a phone until 2 in the morning. 3 weeks later, he called a Royal Canadian Legion branch in his city and asked about volunteering. They told him to come by on a Thursday. He went. He went again the week after. He did not post about it. He did not tell people he was doing it. He just did it, the same way you do something when you've understood, for the first time in your bones, that not everything is content. Elwood Girard's life did not change after that Tuesday morning. He walked home along Roby Street, the same way he walked it every morning, past the Legion he had stopped attending a decade ago, past the elementary school where he had quietly arranged, through the office administrator, so discreetly that even the principal wasn't certain who was behind it, for 3 children's lunch costs to be covered through the winter. He made a sandwich for lunch and read the rest of the paper. He never talked about Rwanda. He never would. There are things that shape a person without ever becoming stories, and Elwood Girard understood the difference between the two more clearly than most people understand anything. The Legion cap went back on its hook by the front door. The regimental pin stayed on his jacket. Outside, the November sky pressed low and grey over Truro, the same sky that had been there when he was a boy watching his father work, the same sky that was there when he was 19 years old and signed his name on a form that would take 26 years of his life and give him something he still didn't have a word for in return. The same sky that was there the night he came home from Bosnia and stood in the Halifax Arrivals Hall and understood that the country moving around him had no idea where he had been or what he had seen. It had not needed to know. That was all right. That had always been all right. Some things do not need to be loud to be real. Some things just need to be carried well, quietly for a long time, in the manner of a man who shows up every morning to the same corner table and orders the same dark roast and tips more than the coffee costs, because that is the only way he knows how to say, without saying it, that he is still here and still glad in his own way to be. The PPCLI pin caught the kitchen light when he moved to put on the kettle. Small and tarnished and exactly what it was.